Welcome to Meadology Week 3, where we'll be partying with a fun guy. Hello, Steve the Canadian Sasquatch coming at you with Meadology Week 3, where we're not partying with a fun guy, we are partying with fungi, as in plural, fungus. That's right, Week 3, yeast. Unfortunately, I cannot get a video clip that I want to use from the great Alton Brown himself, explaining on what yeasts are, using lovely sock puppets. But if you use your favorite search engine and keywords Alton Brown yeast, then you should be able to find the video. I can't put it into this one, so go ahead and give that a try. In the meantime, I'll do my best to explain what they are. As mentioned before, yeasts are essentially fungus. They eat sugars, digest them, and byproduct them off as alcohol and CO2, carbon dioxide. And as mead makers, we only really care about the former of that, the making of the alcohol. But we do care about the CO2 part as well, and I'll touch on some of that later down the road. With yeasts, there are several things that we need to know about them. One, we need to know what their working temperature is. This is important so we know which yeast we can use for where we are fermenting. Not everyone has a dedicated fermentation chamber or that automatically heats or cools as needed to keep the must at the correct temperature for the yeast. Some of us rely on the ambient temperature of our home. With this, we can help nail down which yeast to use. Some yeasts like to ferment cooler, around 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 to 15 Celsius. Others like it in the low 70s Fahrenheit, 20s Celsius. But what does this matter? Well, yeasts, like many things, will go into hibernation when things start to get too cold. They stop processing and just go to sleep. If the temperature gets too warm, then they start stressing and they'll start producing off flavors and fusel alcohols that aren't very pleasant tasting. Or if the temperature even gets that much higher, then it'll just outright kill the yeast. The next thing we need to know is the alcohol tolerance. Some of them are good for 6%, some of them go all the way up to 20%. If we want to make a semi-sweet mead that's around 10% ABV, then we know not to use a yeast that can go all the way up to 20%, as that will ferment things out and make a completely dry mead and make the ABV very, very high. Or if we want to make a light hydromel, then it makes sense to use a 6% yeast so it doesn't dry things out too much. Although some people do enjoy that kind of thing, but a super dry hydromel is very watery, I find, and it's not very pleasant to drink. Third, we need to know the flavor profile of the yeast. They all have their specialty of creating different flavors. White wines, red wines, different styles of beers, even different breads have different yeast. Sourdough, anyone? Finding out about which flavor profile and how it'll work with our meads is also another part of this hobby that's fun. Take your must, which is the mead without the yeast, and split it into different fermenters and pitch different yeasts into them. You'll have different flavors coming out of each of those meads at that point, just because of what the yeast do. Lastly, we need to know the nutrient requirements of the yeast. Does it require a low amount, medium, or high amount of nutrients? This is information that we'll do something about in week 7 when we talk about YAM, yeast assimilable nutrients, and SMA, which is standard nutrient additions. But at this point, it's just something that we need to keep in mind as we go through checking out the different yeasts. And that's it. That's essentially all yeasts are and the info that we need about them. Quite simple, really. They're all responsible for so many tasty things: mead, beer, wine, bread, etc. As you know, in week 1, we used normal bread yeast for making our Joe's Ancient Orange. Speaking of, is anyone out there actually following along with that? How's it going for you? Here's an image of what mine currently looks like. Not too shabby if I say so myself. But yes, we are using a bread yeast there. Most of the time, we will be using wine yeast though. Sometimes we might use a beer yeast. I do use some myself, and you can see it in this here video where I make a braise 1 month mead from start to finish. Warning though, it's a 1 hour video. So grab yourself some mead and sit back and enjoy. Other times we may use unknown or wild yeast. I've made mead from a honey that a friend gave to me out of his own hive. I just added water and let it do its own thing, and it came out pretty tasty. But we'll get into wild yeasts in a little bit. And with that, let's go over some of these I do and do not use. For the most part, I will not use Lavelin's EC1118. A lot of people, that's their go-to yeast. That's what you'll find in a lot of kits and stuff. And there's a reason for that. It's pretty much a no-fail yeast. But I won't use it unless I've got serious issues or I want to carbonate my mead. The reason is EC1118 is a big yeast. It's like the king of all yeasts in the wine room. It's a killer yeast. It ferments up to 18 to 20% and will ferment between 50 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 to 27 Celsius without a problem. It just gets after it. It's a massive workhorse, and it'll start fermenting right away very vigorously. Vigorously being the key word here. Last week we talked about the honey and what heating does to it, and it allows all the aromas to escape when you eat it. The EC1118 is similar to that, with how vigorous it ferments. It just shoots all the aromas and flavors straight out of the airlock. Honey is very, very delicate with its aromas and flavors and all that, and when you have something going at it that hard, poof, everything just goes through the airlock. So that's why I'm not a fan of using that particular yeast. That being said, there are a couple of times when I'll use the EC1118. The first time is when I get a stuck fermentation. It pitch the yeast and nothing happens for a couple of days. It's like, okay, I need to do something before some of the bad stuff take over in there. So I check in the 1118 and it will usually start fermenting within hours. And if there is anything bad in there, like I mentioned before, it's a killer yeast. And I meant that literally. It will go after and kill off any of the other bugs that are in there usually and use them for its own nutrients. The other time I'll use it is when I want to carbonate. Yes, you can carbonate meads. They're lovely when they've got a nice champagne-esque carbonation going on it, but not all of them are suited for that. But anyways, carbonating, you add a little bit more honey, pitch in the 1118 as you're bottling, and you want to make sure you're using bottles that can handle the carbonation. So the yeast, the 1118 gets after it and starts munching on that new honey and creates the CO2 and gives us carbonation. And why do I use 1118 for carbonating? Well, its alcohol tolerance is high. So if we have a 10, 12, 16% ABV mead and we want to carbonate it, well, the alcohol tolerance of EC118 is 18 to 20%, so it can go in there and still get the job done without dying off because the alcohol is too high. So those are the two reasons why. Only two times when I will use the 1118. But what if you do want a super high ABV mead? Then that's where Lavelin's K1V1116 comes in. It can ferment up to 18%, has a similar temperature range as the EC1118, but 1116 is gentler it doesn't get after it quite as hard as the 18 does. And here in the Texas summers, I've had really good results just letting it sit out without the fermentation temperature controls. It gets after it and does its job. No off flavors to mention of, so it's a good one for that. When you want to create a traditional mead or a cider, which is an apple cider that is made with honey, so cider versus cider, everybody's got to have their own unique name to the stuff. Anyways, I prefer to use Lavallin's D47. It ferments clean and easily goes up to 15%. It does like to ferment a little bit on the cooler side, so 68 to Fahrenheit or 20 degrees Celsius, which makes it a good yeast here in Texas in the winter when it does cool off. But I do have the ability to control the temperatures of my fermentations, so I can use it throughout the year, and I try to keep it right around the 65 to 68 Fahrenheit temperatures, and it always comes out super clean. And on the cider side, it does bring out the apple flavors quite nicely. You can tell you're drinking a nice apple drink. Sometimes it's a little too nice because they are 12 to 14%. It can be dangerous. So it's a simple, easy to use, robust yeast that does what you want, typically. When you start adding other fruit, specifically berries, you want something that can help that shine through without being muddled with the yeast flavors. D47 can do this, but with other fruit, and like I said, specifically berries, Lavallin's 71B1122 does a better job. Again, it goes up to about 14-15% ABV, and it can ferment at temps between 60 and 85, which is 15 to 30 degrees Celsius. But it really likes to be right around the 68 to 70 or 20 to 22 range. It's super clean at that temperature. There is a reason out there that professionals quite often use it as their only yeast at their meaderies. It helps bring out the fruity flavors. It's a solid go-to yeast that's easy to find at most shops. So if you can only get this one yeast, you will not be sad with your results. I was trying to make a blood orange melomel that would keep the beautiful red color of the blood oranges, as all my attempts beforehand had just left me with a light amber orange color in them. After some research, I came across Lavallin's RC212, which supposedly was able to help keep the color in some red wines. I figured I'd give it a shot. Well, it didn't quite keep the color, as you can see in this here, but it is a darker orange. So that is my blood orange marmalade melomel. But what I did discover is it did wondrous things to citrus. Previously I'd used the 71B, but that always kind of muddled the citrus just a bit and gave off some phenolic flavors that not completely unpleasant, but also probably would have been better without. But the RC212 made the citrus flavors shine. It's absolutely it's like sipping on orange. So it absolutely shines here, and without the phenolics as well. It was a happy and sad discovery. Happy because of the great flavors that I came through, but sad because it didn't keep the color that I was looking for. But it's my go-to yeast now for when I do anything citrus. As previously mentioned, I do use beer yeast for making meads. A brilliant man, Bray, did a lot of research in finding the correct combination to be able to make a really good mead in 1 month. And after all his research, he found the key to all this was using Yeast 1338, which is a Belgian-style beer yeast. It ferments everything quickly and cleanly and settles out within 1 month. And again, you can head over to my video here where I actually go start to finish the whole 1 month process of making the Bray's 1 month mead. And yes, I do use a wine yeast when I make my braggots. So a braggot is essentially a beer and a mead that are combined. When I do it, I take the same number of pounds of grains that I use and use that for the number of pounds of honey I use. So if I use 12 pounds of grains, I use 12 pounds of honey. And then that creates a ridiculously high ABV beverage usually, but it also gives me a very good balance of flavors between the grains and the honey. Anyways, with Lavelin's D254, I wanted something that would help ferment all the big sugars, and it's good up to 16%, and bring about a nice vinous quality to the braggot. After reading through a lot of yeast profiles, I liked this particular one, so I chose it, and I've used it in 4 or 5 different braggots now, and I have not gone back. It's done a fantastic job at fermenting things cleanly, giving me that vinous quality that I look for in a braggot. Just very tasty. As I mentioned before, I have made mead just by adding water to it. It was honey that I knew where it came from, as I actually helped harvest it from my friend's hive. I have no idea what kind of yeast it really is, but it did make some of the nicest flavored mead I've had in a traditional. I then went on to harvest the yeast and made a braggot / gruit, which is a beer without hops, with this same yeast that I used previously. And that also turned out fantastic. But sometimes you don't get so lucky and end up with some wild yeast or bug that don't ferment things nicely, and you end up with a lot of off flavors. So if you do decide to give wild yeast a try, make small batches, and that way you don't waste a lot of honey, which can be expensive in these experimental batches of wild yeast. So I have never tried any yeast that was labeled specifically for mead, either sweet, dry, or semi-sweet, or any of that. When I first got into making mead, there was a lot of people talking about how many problems that they had when they were using those yeasts. Basically, you have to really baby them and give them specific nutrients at specific times and aerate and mix, and I'm lazy. I don't really want to be bothered with that much work for something like that when there are so many other yeasts that we can use out there. Not to say if you want to give it a try, go for it. If you've got the time and the motivation to go through step feeding and mixing and all that for 2-3 weeks, then sure, give it a try. I'm sure the meads will be fantastic. Those yeasts just aren't for me. So our last topic on yeast is killing them. We have our mead right where we want it. It's the perfect sweetness, the flavor is awesome, but it's still sweet, and the yeast are still in there, so they could still go on doing their job of eating up all the sugars and drying it out. So what we need to do is kill the yeast. Now, it's a 2-step process. First, you need to stop them from reproducing. For that, we use potassium sorbate. So the yeast will get a hold of that, eat it, and it essentially makes them sterile so that they can no longer reproduce. Secondly, we need to sanitize the yeast. Sanitization, from week 1, we were using sodium or potassium metabisulfites for killing the yeasts and bugs that we didn't want on our equipment. So we use the potassium sorbate and the potassium metabisulfites to stop reproducing and to kill the yeast. And then that way our mead will be at the sweetness we want, and we don't have to worry about the yeast coming back alive, and we can safely bottle our meads because, well, there's no yeast in there, so they won't carbonate on us. Especially if we're using something like the EC 1118, that's pretty hard to kill off. It actually requires more sorbate and metabisulfites than most of the other yeasts. Again, it's a very strong yeast. So in the end, that's pretty much all there is to yeast. We could go into the organic chemistry of how they work and how they die and all that. Well, nobody really wants that, unless you're a biologist. And then if you are, then you probably already know more than I do on it, and it would be...
Charlie Bucket!
Yes, Mr. Turpentine?
I shall need an assistant. Come and give me a hand. We have here nitric acid, glycerine, and a special mixture of my own. Together, it's horrible, dangerous stuff, blows you up. But mixed together in the right way, as only I know how, what do you think it makes?
I don't know, sir.
Of course you don't know. You don't know because only I know. If you knew and I didn't know, then you'd be teaching me instead of me teaching you. And for a student to teach his teacher, it's presumptuous and rude. Do I make myself clear?
Yes, sir.
Good.
I do hope that you have enjoyed and or learned something here that is of use to you. And if you have, I'd like to invite you to hit the thumbs up button. And if not already, I would invite you to also subscribe so you don't miss out on the next week's video or the weeks after that as they come out in this Meadology series. And with all that, I will say, be sure to have a pint of awesome, as I know I will. And I'll see you all next week. Cheers. Yeast packaging is another thing to look for. So we all remember the bread yeast. It came in a little sacket like this. Well, this is actually the lab ones, 71B 1122. They come in, a lot of them are this. I don't talk about this one. I've not used it. I was going to use it for an experiment. I never got around to it. Here's the RC212. It comes in a completely different package because this is from More Wine. And they buy it in bulk and repackage it in their own packaging to make it cheaper for us. White Labs, well, they actually don't use vials anymore. They use little foil packets as well for their liquid yeast. So these ones are all dry yeasts. The ones in the tubes, as you can see, liquid. And again, Y yeast. This is the Belgian yeast, 1338, and it too is liquid. So those are the packages, and if you're doing your own yeast thing, then little jars of them, and as you can see, there's some yeast right there in the bottom. So yeah, those are the wild yeasts that I was just talking about. So when you're looking, yeast come in all different kinds of shapes and forms at the store. Just be sure to keep the packets, the liquid ones, need to be kept in the fridge. The dry ones should be kept in the fridge or the freezer. You can freeze these ones and they will last that much longer.